Chloe had always dreamed of going viral on social media. Her phone was packed with videos of her pranks and stunts, but none of them had reached the fame she wanted. She told herself this trip to London would change that. With Buckingham Palace as her backdrop, she was sure she could pull off something big enough to grab everyone's attention. She arrived at the gates of the palace on a bright, sunny afternoon. Tourists from all over the world crowded the area, snapping photos of the iconic guards. The royal guards were famous for their stillness and unshakable focus. Dressed in their red uniforms and tall black hats, they stood like statues. No matter what anyone did, it was their discipline and composure that drew so many visitors every day. Chloe wasn't impressed, though. She rolled her eyes as she watched other tourists respect the lines painted on the ground and snap polite pictures. Boring, she muttered under her breath. To her, this wasn't just a tourist spot, it was her stage. Her three friends followed her, a mix of nervous energy and quiet excitement on their faces. They had seen Chloe's antics before, but this time, even they were uneasy. "Are you sure about this, Chloe?" one of them asked hesitantly. "Of course I'm sure," Chloe replied with a grin. "This is my chance to go viral. People love bold, crazy stuff. Nobody remembers boring vacation photos." The group moved closer to the line where tourists were allowed to stand. Chloe eyed the nearest royal guard, who stood tall and silent with his rifle by his side. His expression didn't change, even as children giggled and waved in front of him. Chloe smirked, convinced she could get a reaction. She pulled out her phone and whispered to her friends, "Start recording. This is going to be hilarious." Her friends exchanged uneasy glances, but reluctantly held up their phones. Chloe didn't notice. She was too focused on her plan. As Chloe stepped closer to the guard, the crowd around her started to notice. Whispers spread, and a few people pulled out their own phones to film, curious about what she was about to do. Chloe loved the attention and played it up, smiling and waving at the cameras. Standing just a few feet from the guard, she crossed her arms and said loudly, "Let's see how unshakable you really are." The tourists gasped, and a few murmured for her to stop. Chloe ignored them, her confidence growing. To her, this wasn't just a prank. It was her big moment. She had no idea that her boldness was about to backfire in ways she couldn't imagine. The air was warm and bustling with excitement as tourists swarmed around Buckingham Palace. Chloe stood in front of the royal guard, her heart racing with anticipation. The guard remained as still as a statue, his eyes fixed forward, showing no sign of emotion. His posture was perfect, and his focus was unbreakable. This was exactly what Chloe wanted, someone to challenge. The crowd around her was growing, their whispers turning into murmurs of curiosity. People were pointing their phones at Chloe, unsure whether they were about to witness something funny or something foolish. Chloe didn't care. She was focused on one thing, getting attention. Her friends were still holding their phones, though their faces showed concern. "Chloe, I don't think this is a good idea," one of them said softly, glancing nervously at the guard. But Chloe, full of excitement, waved off their concerns. "Relax, it's just a joke. You'll see, everyone's going to love it," she said confidently, her voice loud enough for the crowd to hear. She wanted to make sure this moment would be remembered by everyone around her. The royal guard's stoic expression didn't change. He was a professional. He had been through this before. Tourists tried to get a reaction from him every day, but he never wavered. He was trained to ignore distractions and focus on his duties. It wasn't easy, but he had perfected the art of remaining calm no matter what was happening around him. Chloe, determined to get a reaction, took a step closer to the guard. She could feel the eyes of the tourists on her, and it only fueled her confidence. She wasn't afraid to push the boundaries. "Come on, why don't you smile or something?" she teased, her voice cutting through the quiet afternoon air. Some of the tourists chuckled, while others exchanged worried glances. Chloe leaned in even closer, nearly standing right in front of the guard. His eyes didn't flicker. He didn't move an inch. It was like he didn't even notice her presence. This only made Chloe more frustrated. She had been expecting some kind of reaction. Anything. But nothing came. She quickly glanced at her phone, making sure it was still recording. She wanted to capture every moment, every awkward second. She could already imagine the comments and likes pouring in on her video. Her followers would go wild. "This is boring," she muttered under her breath. It was almost like the guard was ignoring her on purpose, as if he could sense her intentions. Chloe frowned and decided to take things up a notch. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small canister she had hidden inside. The tourists around her began to notice, but they were unsure of what to make of it. Chloe didn't notice the change in the crowd's mood. All she could think about was making the guard react. With the canister in hand, she stood straight and pointed it toward the guard. "Let's see how unflappable you really are," she said aloud, her voice carrying over the crowd. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to cross a line that would change everything. Chloe held the small canister tightly in her hand, her fingers gripping it with excitement. She could feel the eyes of the crowd on her, but her focus was solely on the royal guard. She was so sure this would get him to react. People would talk about her for days, maybe even weeks. She imagined the comments and the views as she prepared to make her move. The air around her was charged with anticipation. People had started to realize what she was holding, and a few began to whisper. Some stepped back, sensing that something wasn't quite right, while others held up their phones to catch the moment. Chloe, however, was completely oblivious to their growing discomfort. She was focused only on getting the reaction she craved. She took a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline rush through her veins. "This will be the video that gets me noticed," she thought. Chloe raised the canister, pointing it toward the royal guard, her aim steady and her hands confident. "Let's see how calm you really are when you're sprayed in the face," she said with a laugh, as though it was all part of some harmless prank. The crowd around her shifted uneasily. Some gasped, while others whispered in warning. "Don't do it," someone muttered. But Chloe was already too far in. She didn't hear them. She was already committed, and the thrill of the moment was consuming her. The royal guard didn't flinch. He stood tall, his rifle still at his side, his expression as unchanging as before. Chloe didn't get the reaction she wanted, and it frustrated her even more. His indifference only made her more determined. "This is getting boring," she complained aloud. "Why aren't you reacting?" With a sudden movement, she pressed the nozzle of the canister and sprayed a burst of pepper spray directly at the guard's face. The sharp mist filled the air, and for a split second, the crowd froze, unsure of what to do next. The guard's face remained unchanged for a moment, but then he took a step back, his hand instinctively reaching for his eyes. The crowd murmured in surprise, some people gasping in shock, while others stepped away in fear. For a brief moment, Chloe felt a sense of victory. She had done it. The guard was finally reacting, but in a way she hadn't expected. Her friends, who had been filming the entire time, looked on in surprise. They weren't sure if they should laugh or feel bad for the guard. But Chloe was too caught up in the moment. "Gotcha," she shouted triumphantly, grinning at the camera. She didn't even notice the change in the atmosphere around her. Her laughter was loud, but there was no joy in the faces of the onlookers. The mood had shifted, and Chloe was too busy basking in her success to see it. In that instant, something strange happened. Chloe's own satisfaction quickly turned into confusion as she felt a sudden sting in her eyes. She blinked rapidly, her vision blurring. At first, she thought it was just a trick of the light. But then it hit her. She had made a huge mistake. The pepper spray wasn't just for the guard. It was for anyone who got too close. And now, Chloe was feeling the full force of the very thing she had used to attack someone else. Chloe blinked furiously, trying to clear her blurry vision. She had thought the pepper spray would get the guard to move, but now her own eyes were stinging, and everything around her seemed to be swooning in a blur. At first, she tried to rub her eyes, but the burning sensation only seemed to get worse. She quickly realized what had happened. She had sprayed herself. "Why does it burn so much?" Chloe gasped, her voice filled with panic. Her friends, who had been recording the entire event, froze, unsure of what to do. One of them stepped forward, looking at her with wide eyes. "Chloe, are you okay?" her friend asked, clearly worried now. But Chloe was too caught up in her own pain to hear her properly. She felt her face flushing with embarrassment as the burning sensation spread across her eyes. It felt like fire was racing through her skin, and the more she tried to rub her eyes, the worse it became. "I can't see," Chloe cried out, now stumbling back from the guard. The crowd had begun to gather around her, murmuring, some with a mix of concern and shock, while others just watched in disbelief. They had witnessed her spray the guard, and now the tables had turned. The royal guard, still holding his position, took a moment to compose himself, his face clearly irritated by the spray, but still maintaining his professionalism. His hands reached for his eyes as well, but he knew how to handle it. Meanwhile, Chloe continued to panic, her hands flailing, as she tried to find something to help ease the pain. "It's my own fault," she shouted in frustration, tears welling up in her eyes from the sting. "Why didn't I think about this before?" Her friends quickly moved to help, but they were just as helpless as Chloe. She couldn't see, couldn't focus, and the world around her seemed to be a blur of shapes and colors. People in the crowd started to murmur, some laughing nervously while others offered their assistance. But Chloe's face was red with pain, and her pride had completely evaporated. She could hear the whispers of the onlookers, but the words didn't register in her panic-stricken state. "I need water. I need water," she shouted, her voice trembling. The pain in her eyes was unbearable, and the reality of her mistake began to sink in. Her grand moment of victory had turned into a nightmare. The guard, who had remained stoic through her provocation, was now completely ignored by Chloe, who was the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. One of the nearby security officers quickly moved toward Chloe. Seeing her distress, "Are you all right?" he asked firmly, but his concern was clear. Without waiting for an answer, he quickly guided her toward a nearby bench, away from the crowd. "Stay here and keep your eyes closed," he instructed. "We'll get you some help." Chloe nodded weakly, still struggling to see clearly. She felt humiliated, her plan backfiring in the worst possible way. The people who had been amused by her earlier antics were now looking at her with sympathy, but also with a sense of disbelief. The prank she had hoped would make her famous had instead left her in a painful and embarrassing situation. And as Chloe sat there, trying to hold back tears, she couldn't help but wonder if this would be the last time. She tried to make a spectacle out of someone else for her own amusement. Chloe sat on the bench, her hands pressing against her stinging eyes. The pain from the pepper spray was unbearable, and no matter how much she tried to rub her face, it only seemed to get worse. Her friends hovered around her, looking at her with concern but also with a hint of disbelief. They had been part of her plan, the one that was supposed to make them all laugh and go viral. But now, the tables had turned. "Chloe, we need to get you some help," one of her friends said, her voice filled with worry. She reached into her bag for some tissues, trying to help Chloe as best as she could. But Chloe wasn't in the mood for sympathy. She was too upset with herself, too embarrassed to admit how badly everything had gone wrong. "I can't see. Why did I do this?" Chloe muttered through gritted teeth, trying to hold back tears. She had been so confident, so sure that her plan would succeed. She thought the guard would flinch or maybe even shout at her. But instead, the reality had hit her hard. She had sprayed herself, and now she was the one suffering. The pain in her eyes was excruciating, and the worst part was she couldn't do anything to stop it. She blinked furiously, but it only seemed to make the burning worse. Her vision was blurry, and her face felt as if it was on fire. Chloe had never felt so foolish in her life. The laughter she had imagined hearing from her followers, the comments of admiration she had expected, none of it was happening. Instead, she was surrounded by people who were now watching her, some with sympathy, others with judgment. Her friends were now speaking with a security guard who had come over to help. He seemed calm but concerned, urging Chloe to keep her eyes shut while he quickly called for medical assistance. He had seen this kind of situation before, and he knew that Chloe needed to get treated as soon as possible. "I didn't mean for this to happen," Chloe whispered, her voice filled with regret. "I just wanted to make a funny video. Why did I think it would work?" The crowd around her had started to disperse, but Chloe could still hear their murmurs. Some were still recording, capturing her struggle and her discomfort. Chloe didn't care about the videos now. The reality of the situation had hit her hard. She had crossed a line, and now she was paying the price. As the security guard stayed by her side, Chloe felt a deep sense of humiliation. She had tried to get a reaction from someone who was trained to stay calm in the face of adversity, but it was she who had ended up reacting. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had been so focused on making a spectacle out of the royal guard, and now she was the one who was the center of attention, for all the wrong reasons. Within minutes, a first aid officer arrived with a bottle of water and some eye wash. Chloe gratefully splashed her face with the cool liquid, the burning sensation slowly easing. But no amount of water could wash away the embarrassment she felt. Let this be a lesson, she thought to herself. It was a harsh reality, but it was one she knew she wouldn't forget anytime soon. She had learned the hard way that sometimes karma had a way of striking back when you least expected it. Chloe sat in the quiet corner of the bench, feeling the sting in her eyes slowly subside as the cool water helped wash away the pepper spray. The pain was still there, but it was becoming more bearable. Her friends were trying their best to comfort her, but there was no hiding the fact that her prank had backfired in the worst way possible. The embarrassing moment felt like it would never end. As the first aid officer continued to help her, Chloe couldn't shake the feeling that she had made a huge mistake. She had come to London with the goal of getting attention, but now all she had was a crowd of people who had seen her fail. The recording of her stunt, which she had hoped would go viral for all the wrong reasons, was already circulating on social media, but not in the way she had imagined. The comments were pouring in, some sympathetic, some mocking her for the way she had handled the situation. "Chloe, look at this," one of her friends said, holding up a phone. Chloe's heart sank as she saw her own face on the screen, her eyes red and swollen, her expression twisted in pain. The video was everywhere now, and the caption read, "Tourist pranks royal guard. Instant karma strikes back." It had been shared thousands of times in just a few minutes. The video wasn't the fun, lighthearted content she had hoped for. Instead, people were laughing at her, not with her. They had seen her try to embarrass the guard, only to end up humiliated herself. The irony was glaring, and Chloe couldn't escape it. As the first aid officer finished up, Chloe looked around and noticed the security guards talking to a few other tourists who had witnessed the incident. They were gathering information and writing notes. Chloe's stomach twisted. She knew what was coming next. It wasn't just the pain in her eyes that was going to be the problem. The authorities would be involved. The security guards were going to report the incident. One of her friends spoke up nervously. "Chloe, maybe we should just leave. We don't want any more trouble." Chloe hesitated. She could feel her heart racing. She had no intention of sticking around for more attention. The last thing she wanted was more security officers showing up to take her statement. Before she could decide what to do, a police officer appeared. He was calm but firm, and it was clear that he had already heard what had happened. Chloe looked at him, her face flushed with embarrassment. "We need to talk about what just happened," the officer said, his tone serious. "You've just sprayed a royal guard with pepper spray. That's an offense, and we're going to have to take down your details." Chloe felt her throat tighten. She had no idea that her prank would lead to this. It was supposed to be harmless fun, but now it seemed like it was something much more serious. She had broken the rules, and now she was going to have to face the consequences. The officer wasn't rude, but his presence made Chloe feel small. He wasn't here to laugh at her or make jokes. He was here to handle a situation that had escalated quickly. The reality of the consequences hit her hard. Her video was now a lesson to others. Sometimes, trying to get attention the wrong way could lead to situations you couldn't take back. As the officer took down her information, Chloe couldn't help but wonder how she had ended up here. Her desire to go viral had clouded her judgment, and now she was paying for it. The lesson was clear, and it was one she would never forget. What goes around truly does come back around. Chloe's phone buzzed relentlessly as the officer took down her details. Each notification brought more discomfort, and she could feel the growing weight of the situation settling in. Her social media, which she had once used to post lighthearted pranks, was now flooded with comments about her embarrassing stunt. The video of her spraying herself with pepper spray had gone viral, but not in the way she had imagined. At first, there were a few supportive comments, with people feeling sorry for Chloe and her painful experience. But as more people watched the video, the tone of the comments began to change. Some people were questioning her behavior, calling her out for disrespecting the Royal Guard, while others were mocking her for thinking she could get away with such a stunt. The mockery didn't stop there. Many were sharing the video, making jokes at her expense. Chloe's phone screen filled with messages that made her feel more isolated than ever. "Why would you do something so stupid?" One comment read, "That guard was just doing his job. You really thought he'd react." Another comment said, "This is what happens when people try to mess with the wrong person." Instant karma. Chloe couldn't escape the constant stream of negativity. It was as if every person who saw the video had something to say about her poor judgment. She had been so focused on making a viral video that she hadn't thought about the consequences. Now, it seemed like the whole world was watching her every mistake. Her friends tried to comfort her, but it was clear that Chloe was already feeling the weight of her actions. "It's not your fault," one of them said. "You didn't mean for any of this to happen." But Chloe knew better. She had been reckless, and now the world was paying attention, not for her creativity, but for her foolishness. The feeling of humiliation was overwhelming, and it didn't help that the video was spreading faster than she could keep up with. What had started as a prank had turned into a lesson in respect and consequences. At the same time, news outlets began to pick up on the story. A quick search online showed headlines like, "Tourist pranks Royal Guard, regrets it instantly," and "Pepper spray prank turns into lesson in instant karma." The media wasn't letting it go. Chloe was becoming the face of what not to do as a tourist. As Chloe sat in the crowded waiting area of the police station, the officer's voice cut through her thoughts. "You'll have to stay here for a while, and we'll need to process everything before you can leave. You've caused a disturbance, and we have to make sure this is handled properly." Her heart sank. She had never imagined her day would end like this. The attention she had sought out, the fame she had craved, was now a nightmare. Instead of becoming a viral sensation for something funny or clever, she had become infamous for a reckless decision. Chloe couldn't help but wonder if there was a way to take it all back. She'd never been one to think things through carefully, but now she understood just how quickly things could spiral out of control. The video, the comments, the news, it all seemed so overwhelming. Chloe had crossed a line, and now the world was watching her face the consequences. The day Chloe had imagined would be filled with laughter, fun, and viral success had turned into an endless nightmare. After hours of waiting in the police station, she was finally escorted into a small room where a stern-faced officer began taking down her details. Chloe sat there, feeling a lump form in her throat. She had never thought it would come to this. Her mind raced back to the moment she sprayed the pepper spray at the Royal Guard. At that time, it had seemed like a harmless prank, something to shock the guard and impress the crowd. But now, the reality of her actions was settling in. The officer before her wasn't here to hear excuses. Chloe knew this was serious. "You understand why we're doing this?" the officer asked, looking directly at her. Chloe nodded, her face flushed with embarrassment. She had broken the law. There was no escaping that fact now. The officer continued, explaining that spraying someone, especially a royal guard who was fulfilling his duties, was a crime. Chloe had caused an unnecessary disturbance, and her reckless actions had led to the involvement of the police. She had never imagined that her attempt at gaining attention would escalate so quickly, but now she was facing the consequences. As the officer took her statement, Chloe couldn't help but think about the viral video that had started this whole mess. The moment she had sprayed herself with pepper spray had become the defining moment of her day. Instead of showing her humorous side, the video painted her as a careless tourist who thought she could get away with anything. The internet had responded swiftly, and Chloe had become the punchline of jokes across social media platforms. She had thought she was going to be the center of admiration, but instead, she had become an example of how not to act when traveling. Her phone buzzed again, and Chloe winced, not wanting to see the new wave of comments flooding her notifications. Her friends had been trying to reach her, but she didn't have the heart to respond. She was embarrassed and ashamed of her actions. She had tried to make a joke out of something serious, and now she was learning the hard way that some things shouldn't be joked about. As the officer finished his paperwork, he reminded Chloe that she would need to appear in court for her actions. There would likely be a fine, and she could face further legal consequences depending on how the situation was handled. Chloe had no idea what would happen next, but she knew this was a turning point in her life. When she left the station hours later, it was with a feeling of dread. Her friends had waited outside, unsure of what to expect. Chloe couldn't bring herself to look at them, knowing that they had been part of her plan, and now they were caught up in the mess she had created. She had embarrassed herself, her friends, and worst of all, the royal guard who had just been doing his job. The lesson Chloe took away from the experience was clear. Sometimes, the things you do for attention can lead to unexpected consequences. She had learned it the hard way, and there was no undoing what had already happened. As she walked away from the station, Chloe silently promised herself that she would never let her desire for fame blind her again. Chloe walked away from the police station, feeling the weight of the day's events press down on her. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the busy streets of London. She could hear the hum of the city around her, but it all felt distant, as though she were in a dream. Nothing seemed real. The viral video, the police, the court date. She never imagined any of this would happen when she first arrived in the city. Her friends had gathered outside the station, waiting anxiously for her. As she approached them, they didn't know whether to smile or to show their concern. They had seen it all unfold. Her big idea, the prank gone wrong, and now the police involvement. Chloe didn't say anything at first. She simply sat down beside them, feeling completely drained. One of her friends broke the silence. "Chloe, are you okay? We were all so worried. You really scared us." Chloe nodded slowly, still processing everything that had happened. "I thought I was doing something funny. I wanted to be the star of my own video, but now everything's just a mess." She sighed, shaking her head. "I was stupid. I thought it would be harmless, but I didn't think it through." Her friends exchanged glances but didn't say anything right away. They understood. Chloe had always been the bold one, the one who loved taking risks. But this time, the risk had gone too far. "I never realized how much of an impact a stupid prank could have," Chloe continued. "It's all over the internet now. People are laughing at me, not with me. It's like they're enjoying my mistake." She paused and looked at her phone. The video had exploded on social media. The comments kept flooding in, most of them mocking her, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Chloe felt like the whole world was watching her downfall. "I just wanted to get some attention, you know. Maybe even be a little famous," Chloe admitted quietly. "But now I can't stop thinking about how much I hurt that guard. He was just doing his job, and I thought it was funny to mess with him." Her friends sat in silence, letting her words sink in. It was clear that Chloe was starting to understand the full weight of her actions. What had started as a simple idea for a viral video had now become a serious lesson about respect, responsibility, and the consequences of her actions. "I know you're sorry, Chloe," one of her friends said gently. "But what matters now is what you do next. You can't change what happened, but you can learn from it. You don't have to keep making mistakes like this." Chloe looked up at her friend, her eyes still tired but filled with a new understanding. "Yeah," she said softly. "I don't want to be that person anymore. I don't want to be known for doing stupid things just for attention. I want to be better than that." The group sat together for a while longer, reflecting on the events of the day. It wasn't an easy moment for Chloe, but it was a turning point. She had learned a hard lesson, and while the path forward wouldn't be simple, she knew it was time for change. The experience had shaken her, but it had also made her realize that fame and attention weren't worth losing respect for others. As Chloe left the station with her friends, she felt a sense of resolve. She wasn't the same person who had walked into Buckingham Palace that morning, looking for a viral moment. She had learned the importance of thinking before acting and the value of treating others with kindness and respect. And while the road ahead would take time to rebuild her reputation, Chloe was determined to make better choices in the future. The lesson had been harsh, but it was one she would never forget.